Welcome to our monthly charity webinar, which is co-hosted by Quilter Cheviot, Browne, Jacobson and Kingston Smith. This session we will be exploring the modern social activism, the changing face of philanthropy and charities in 2021 and beyond. We will be asking the question, is there a generational shift? Might this shift result in us becoming a more caring society, or is this just part of the normal evolutionary process? By way of introduction, my name is Charles Mesquita. I work at Quilter Cheviot as a charity director. I'm also a trustee of RL Glasspool, Bowel Research UK and Prism the Gift Fund. I will be moderating the session today. I am joined, and I'm very excited by this, by Elham Fardad, who's founder and CEO of the charity Migrant Leaders, which works to inspire and develop disadvantaged young first and second generation migrants across the UK. Is co-founder and CEO of ID Inclusions, having spent 15 years in industry in senior finance roles with GE, News Corp, followed by 9 years at Ernst & Young, or EY, as they're now known. We've also got Spencer John, who's founder and trustee of Yellowsands Foundation, a charity which works to break down barriers, preventing children from succeeding academically, is a trustee at Compass for Life Foundation, which aims to help disadvantaged children achieve their ambitions, is a school governor, and when he's got time in his day job, which I'm amazed he has. He is a senior executive at Deutsche Bank. I'm also joined, as normal, by my compadres. So Catherine Rustomji, who is one of the leading charity lawyers in the UK, has over 20 years experience, is a partner at Browne Jacobson and also a trustee of Yorkshire Cancer Research, and a trustee of Browne Jacobson's Charitable Trust, which is a grant-making charity. And last but certainly not least, the Diane of the audit world, James Saunders, who's a partner at Kingston Smith. His area of specialism, get that out, get my teeth in, is education sector, and he's a trustee and advisor to independent schools, charities, and academy trusts. So before we start, I just thought I might just set the scene a little bit here. You know, over the last 30 years, we've certainly witnessed a seismic change in the charity sector. I sort of slightly glibly describe it as sort of going from the backwater to a powerhouse. You know, and you just have to look at the sector's annual turnover, which according to the Charity Commission for England and Wales is around 78 billion, which is twice what we spend on defence and half what we spend on the NHS. And there is no doubt about it that we have seen part of that has resulted as a significant expansion through outsourcing of the welfare state. You know, there's been incredible professionalization, both in the way organizations operate and the people that work within them. And there has certainly been greater emphasis on governance and regulations, which we covered in the last session of our webinar. So with no more ado from me, let's turn and start with the first question. And Elham, I'm going to start with you, if I may. What was the driving force behind setting up your charity, and what does it do? Because I don't think I did it justice in the introduction.
Thank you, Charles. Your introduction was excellent. I'd love to tell you that, there was a 20-year plan and a vision to start my charity. But the reality is, like most good adventures and activism, it has started with a problem that I felt passionate about. Back in 2017, the Parker Review was published. And as you know, the Parker Review looked at the ethnic diversity of UK boardrooms. And for me, when I looked at the data, my passion really was ethnic diversity in UK corporates with the specific intersection of social mobility and youth development. So I realized, looking at the numbers, that if we are to address some of the inequalities in society and diversity and inclusion challenges and opportunities in the corporates, and I would need to really do something industrial about it. So I launched the charity Migrant Leaders, and where we are today is that we have 600 senior mentors from 95 FTSE 100 and leading firms. We very carefully match these mentors to the aspirations and sector and tech technical field objectives of each of the young mentees who are between 16 and 25, first and second generation migrants, as well as young people from disadvantaged backgrounds in Britain. They get a mentor, and we also have corporate partnerships with companies such as Anglo-American, Smith & Nephew, and Kantar. So through our partnerships, we co-develop workshops, training, conferences, work experiences, internships, and a lot of great stories and opportunities have come about for these young people. And really the best aspect of my job is working with the young people each day and hearing of their successes through our program.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. And Spencer, what about you? What drove you to set up your charities, and what exactly do they do?
Yeah, thank you, Charles. So I set up the Yellowsands Foundation back in 2018. Primarily at the time, I'd spent 20 plus years working in the private sector, mostly in financial services. I have 2 young children of my own, an 8-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. And as you can probably tell from the accent, I'm originally from Wales. For me, it was more, I recognized that the opportunities that my own children were getting were very different to those opportunities that I was seeing children of friends and family back home in Wales when I was returning back home for rugby matches, weddings, funerals. And over the years, it just become more and more and more of an issue for me. The morality of it just started to hit me really hard, to be honest. There's no other way to put it. I just really, it really grinded me that we had these children in Wales that had academic potential, but through no fault of their own, usually because they were dealing with a level of stress outside of school that would probably cripple most adults. Things like dealing with siblings in prison, or absent parents, or just a very dysfunctional out-of-school setup. So back in 18, I decided to try and do something about that, and set about setting up the Yellowsands Foundation. And ultimately what we do is we partner with schools to try and identify those children that do have academic potential and are trying to succeed, but through no fault of their own, and not reaching their full academic potential due to what they're having to cope with outside of school. We then step in and try and support the school to support the child, usually through summer schools and dedicated tuition that the foundation pays for. So the motive for me, Charles, was very personal.
So very much based on your personal experience and background and where you'd come from. Definitely. And wanting to make a real difference. And a question for both of you, and I'll start with you again, Elham, if I may. But so what were your impressions of the charity sector before you, I mean, you said you hadn't really planned this, hadn't thought about it. I don't know how much experience you'd had. And with that question, so there's 2 parts to it, is why did you set up your own charity rather than not looking for an organization that was doing something similar and putting your energies into that?
A really good question, Charles. I didn't have any preconceptions about the charity sector because I had spent 20-something years in the private sector as a finance and transformation director in GE, News Corp, and EY. What I knew for sure is that I wanted to empower, train, and enable young people to fulfill their potential. And I knew that our program should be designed with the objective to teach them to fish rather than giving them the fish. Why did I set it up as a charity rather than work with another established charity? I think it's because there was quite a gap in the charity sector for what we do at Migrant Leaders. We are really focusing on developing the young people to fulfill whatever level of potential they have towards their aspirations, and particularly focused on working with the top corporates. So it was something unique that we were trying to do, focusing on building social capital, building employability, resilience, leadership, and all the skills and capabilities they need to hit the ground running when they enter the corporate world. And so we're quite unique in that, and I felt that in order to achieve that specific objective, I needed to design something fit for purpose.
I'm going to come back to the corporate world, but Spencer, what about you?
Yes, I think I'd had zero experience of the charity sector before 2018, other than donating money to friends and family, you know, and from that perspective. So what I had was 20 plus years working in financial services, and for those that work in FS, you know, I mean, it's very much where there's a problem, you identify what the problem is and you find innovative solutions to solve that problem. So for me, I probably walked into it a little bit naively at first, in terms of thinking, well, it's a problem, let's solve it, let's line things up, shoot them down, and just taking that business sort of acumen and mentality to trying to solve the problem that was in front of me. It's probably no surprise, given my background, that I took a very risk and control focused in terms of the early months, in terms of getting things set up. Obviously dealing with young adults and children, I was nervous about something going wrong. So I reached out to Kingston Smith and made sure that I had the strong sort of financial and accounting advice, and through their contacts was put in touch with a law firm who then helped me consider all the legal aspects of getting the charity up and running. I think, why did I set my own one up versus financially supporting an already existing one? I did my own research in the middle of 18, and I was struggling to find any charity that was operating in this sort of Swansea to Newport area that specifically was there to try and identify children that had academic potential but weren't living up to their full means. There were plenty of charities that were looking to help children living in poverty, families struggling. There was nothing really that was targeted at really trying to identify those children that were probably at the crossroads in their life, you know what I mean, with a little bit of intervention and support. You could change the career, the destination of their entire life. Without that support, I had witnessed that too many friends either ended up in the graveyard or the prison. And so for me, I really wanted to try and find those children that they were good at maths or good at science or good at English, music, whatever they were good at, and almost put an arm around them and mentor them and give them this, in some cases, the financial support, but in other cases, just give them the opportunities, the connections that probably Catherine, James, you, Charles, you, Elham, we all take for granted. Do you mean, like, if my son wanted to be a doctor, I'm sure at the playground at the weekend in a non-COVID time, I'd probably bump into at least 2 or 3 friends of friends who are doctors. You know what I mean? What I wasn't seeing was those sort of natural opportunities presenting themselves for the children back home. What I have found since starting up this charity is the problem wasn't isolated to just the regions I was trying to help in the south of Wales. And what I've learned over the last 2.5 years is that very much that's a problem that is not only Welsh national, but UK national. And that probably leads me into why then I joined the board of the Compass for Life Foundation as a trustee, because on the C4L board, it's very different to what we do in Yellowsands, but it's across the UK as opposed to Yellowsands, which is very Welsh specific.
And are you restricted just for Wales for Yellowsands geographically?
We are UK restricted, but it's not restricted to Wales specifically. I've worded the articles in terms of expecting that at some point in our first 10 years, we may look to expand past just targeting Wales. So I think the specific wording in our objects is something like aimed at, but not exclusively for, and then it names a few destinations in Wales. But everything we do at the moment, and definitely over the next 5 years, everything that we will do from a Yellowsands perspective will be targeted at helping children in Wales.
Brilliant. And Catherine, do you have any thoughts on what you've heard thus far?
I think it's really interesting, Charles. I mean, I do a lot of work in setting up new charities, and from time to time we have the same argument coming across, that there are too many registered charities, and any charity that is already registered often wants it to be harder for anyone else to get registered, so that we all raise the bar once we're in, rather than look at, wouldn't it be better to have a bigger charity sector and more philanthropy? And I think what we're hearing from Elham and Spencer is the power of being able to leverage your own networks, and that people buy people. And so you need this challenge and change and innovation in the charity sector as much as in any other, so that we're continuing to learn about how can we be more effective, how can we collaborate more, how do we involve the private sector with the charity sector, so that we're having these better outcomes. So, there isn't that judgment about, is your charity worthy? Should you be allowed to set it up? If it is charitable at law, then you have the ability to be able to register that charity. And I think it's fantastic to hear the work that Elham and Spencer are doing, and to see, that there was that untapped need that needed to be met. And now there are 2 charities more than that are now meeting those needs and helping the disadvantaged. So I think, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, no. And what about you, James?
Yeah, it's worth making the point, I think, that both Yellowsands and Migrant Leaders, the Fardad Foundation, they're both CIOs, charitable incorporated organisations, and were set up as such. And I think probably both Elham and Spencer will have benefited slightly from that simpler structure which the Charity Commission brought in, a few years ago. But it does mean that they don't have to set up as a company and a charity. So it's just, it's one of the small benefits, I think, of that's come through in recent years. In terms of what they do, you hear the same from both Elham and Spencer. To solve a problem, came across a problem and wanted to solve it, and that personal response to an issue, I think, is what often generates that sort of personal interest in, and then that desire to set up a charity to do a particular purpose. And of course, it is worth saying they both are set up in response to very specific, very current and relevant issues and matters. The mentoring issue that is very relevant at the moment in our society. The particular, in Spencer's case, the very particular problems of a geographical area, but both are educational focus. Breaking that link or breaking down the barriers between achievement and school life and education. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's encouraging to hear that personal involvement is there, and that they're trying to solve a problem they found. Yeah, that's my take from that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting, and I think we'll probably come on to a little bit onto some of that a little later on. But before we do, just wanted to ask both of you, what were the main challenges that you faced when setting up the organisation, and once it was set up, what were the sort of the challenges and the benefits or the rewards that you've found on the sort of ongoing running and how the organisation has grown and changed? I don't know, Anna, you want to start?
I think some of the challenges I anticipated and others I didn't. I would say that what worked well was using my professional skills and abilities to design the development program, design the roadmap, and deliver on that promise. To use my professional network and connections to every day recruit the senior mentors from companies and large organizations, to have access early on to some charity sector leaders, such as the chief executive of the Mayor's Fund for London, to our patrons, Renee Carriol and Yvonne Thompson. So to get that early advice about the charity sector was really valuable to me. I think what was a challenge was that I wasn't quite as well connected at that time, 3 years ago, to the communities and young people and the beneficiaries that I so wanted to reach out and spread the benefits of the charity to. And I think my formula with that one to this day continues to be every day connecting with communities, reaching out to communities, whether it's the schools, universities, communities, councils, social workers, charities. I talk to them every day and present every day and talk to young people every day in order to spread the word to as many deserving and disadvantaged young people as possible. So there are challenges, but they are solvable, as always.
Of course. And what about you, Spencer?
Yeah, Charles, I having spent 20 plus years in the private sector, I come into the charity sector thinking that the same rules were going to apply. So I was expecting it to be, for want of a better phrase, a dog-eat-dog world. And I didn't. I think what surprised me most is that some of the challenges that I was expecting have actually not been challenges at all. And in fact, have actually been quite the opposite. So for instance, I have found that the willingness to want to help and connect people in the third sector. I've gone to a number of charity conferences. I try and do events like this, and it's amazing just of the networking that comes off the back of such events. Admittedly, it didn't just come overnight. I mean, if I look back to 18 when I first started, I think I must have wrote over 500 letters to as many famous Welsh people that I could imagine, from everywhere, from ex-Hollywood Welsh actors living in California to people living in Patagonia to Welsh friends and family living in Hong Kong. So it's, I mean, I don't want people to misinterpret it. It wasn't given on a plate. There was a lot of hard work went into it. But I think once that snowball started rolling, it really started to grow. Do you know what I mean? And the willingness of people to want to connect you with other people that either have a passion for wanting to help you or have the financial means and might be interested in helping you. That's what I found pleasantly amazing in the third sector. I think I've been blessed in some ways to be connected with the legal and financial accounting support I've had from the start. I'm always someone that I worry sometimes in the work I do in the third sector that it's always with the right intention, but I'm always nervous about, you don't know what you don't know. And is there some rule that I'm meant to be adhering to, or is there, you know, is there a policy I'm meant to have in place that we've overlooked? And that's probably I know it may sound lame for people who work in the third sector full time, who do this day in, day out. But for me, that's probably the biggest concern. I wouldn't say challenge, but the biggest concern I have is overlooking something fundamental, be it health and safety, be it child protection. You don't know what you don't know. That's something that I worry about.
So do you think that holds you back in any way? Because I suspect everybody on this panel completely gets where you come from. Is that it's the old Donald Rumsfeld, isn't it? You know what you know, you know what you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. And it's the last bit that does worry us. And you're trying to. It's that bit about taking risk and not putting an organisation at risk. I suppose I
think done in a balanced way, and definitely with a good dose of the right intention. What I have found is people in government and people in education, particularly headmasters, deputy heads, they're a lot more forgiving, to use your Rumsfeld analogy. They're a lot forgiving of me making some mistakes with the unknown unknowns. You know, I mean, I look back to some of the first schools I went into, and I now reflect on that and I think, wow, there's a number of positions I've put myself into by going into schools where I think, oh, maybe going forward, I'd do that slightly different. I'd make sure that there was a member of staff with me as we're walking around doing it. It's just simple things that unless you're doing it day in, day out, you don't know. But on the flip side of that, as I say, what I have found at least is when someone in government, when someone in education sees the genuine passion that you have, and that when you are doing it for the right reason, people are very forgiving and people want to help. So I definitely wouldn't say it's held me back. In some cases, I think it's advanced the cause. It's been a few people have said to me along the way, I was at a charity conference in Edinburgh about just before COVID, January of last year, and we were talking about fundraising, and this man just asked me, so well, how do you get the funds? I said, well, I just pick up the phone and I call the people I want to speak to. And he goes, well, what if you don't know them? I said, well, you just phone them, just call them. And he was laughing, and he said, oh, maybe I should do that. And to me, that was like, that's crazy. Like, how wouldn't you know that? But then when I was mentioning some of the challenges I had with the schooling, he was looking at me as though I was the alien and say, well, how don't you know that? That's crazy. So it's been very it's been enlightening. That's probably the best word I can use.
I suspect there's a bit of a difference here, is that you're ringing up from somebody who's found as the founder and asking for somebody for money, rather than somebody who's been employed to do fundraising for an organisation, and the conversation is slightly different.
Possibly, Charles. Definitely.
Yeah. And I just want to pick up at, you've both touched on the corporate world, and historically the corporate world has not been particularly big supporters of the charity sector, and understandably their role is their business, is their primary role. But you talk about you've got mentors from 95 of them. Are you seeing a huge change in attitudes towards charities from the corporate sector, and what is driving this? Is this people within the organizations? Is it generationally, so it's coming from the 20, 30 somethings? Is it just companies want to be able to have that sort of label of being seen to be doing the right thing, if one is sitting at the very cynical end of the conversation?
I think it's a combination of all of the above. I think there is a seismic change. I think some of it is bottom up, because people, employees have seen the inequalities in society across the world, and they are seeing the divisions in society, racial tensions, lack of social mobility, and individuals want to help. But also from a top-down point of view, I think corporate leaders are also people. They care too. And also there is pressure on them from their customers, from their employees, from their investors, from society. So they have every reason to help. I think what would make corporates particularly successful in distinguishing themselves about how they are helping is not necessarily only to make a statements about their ESG policies, not to do only posts on LinkedIn and make declarations, not to even just put things in their policies and marketing materials. I think they need to go further than that and build a charitable and social responsibility culture as part of their company's DNA. I always bring the example of how GE, I remember during the time that I worked in GE in my 20s, how they made Six Sigma a way of life and a way of work in our everyday ways of work, and making it part of the DNA of the organization. Some of those methods, training, and ways of work could be incorporated into getting employees all involved into ESG activities.
And what about you, Spencer? What's your...
Yeah, I exactly what Ellen was just saying. Is a few points has resonated very much with me. I think if we look back over the last 30 years, I think definitely through the 90s and the early 2000s, when viewed from the private sector, at least for some of the firms I've worked for throughout my career, the focus was very much on donating time, employee time. So you might get a team together to go and paint a school playground or repair a local park or so forth. What I like about, in particular over the last 5 years, is now there's a really solid framework that's embedded itself, and Ellen touched upon it with the ESG. I think understandably, we're seeing a lot of focus on the E, a lot of focus on the environment. And I personally think that's a good thing. I think what I look forward to maybe over the next 5 to 10 years is more of a focus, or an equal focus, on the S, the social aspects of the ESG. And I definitely think not just financial services, but I think the private sector as a whole is struggling to define what that actually means for them specifically in terms of how they support the social part of ESG. To use Elham's phrase at the start, which I really like, you teach people to fish is far better than giving them the fish. I really like that. And I think, personally, I think that's where the private sector is going to add most of its value on the social side, is very much this idea of bringing that commercial acumen, and either through the opportunities that creates by having the contact with the disadvantaged population in whatever factor they're disadvantaged, whether they're migrants coming into the country that Elham supports, or whether they're people that just have a very dysfunctional family setup that has led to the situation they're in, giving them the contact. And I think the private sector often just underestimates, it's the simple things. It's being able to have a member of staff from a particular firm in an industry that maybe a child is dreaming about working in, but has no frame of reference because no one in their family network or friend network does that particular role. And then seeing them come to the school, or seeing them go to an event, and wow, that person looks like me, or wow, that person sounds like me, or wow, that person is from the same area as me. If they can do it, maybe I can do it. That forms the initial link. And for me, I get goosebumps just thinking about that, because this is, to me, it's not rocket science solving the S part of ESG in the private sector. It's doing the simple things, but doing them really well. And I think that's where we'll see, personally, I think that's where we'll see most of the advances over the next 5 to 10 years from the S in the private sector space.
I suppose the question that I'm grappling with on this is that going to be driven by individuals, or is it going to be driven by companies? I don't know, Catherine or James, if you have a view on this.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. I mean, at my firm, we don't refer to CSR, so corporate social responsibility. I think that's more used to hit corporates over the head, to say you should feel bad for being successful and making money. We refer to it as corporate sustainability, where we as a business need to continue, but we want to work in partnership with charities that we support. So we have key goals around community, environment, education, literacy, next generation. So for us, there needs to be much more of a connection rather than this very, very remote giving where you're just dropping money into a charity and then walking away. We want to see much more involvement, and that's where you're able to get the benefits of, you know, I think as Spencer was saying, you know, what else can we do that can help that charity that isn't necessarily purely financial? And I think that's where you get much more partnership and collaboration and discussion happening, rather than this sort of Victorian element of just give us some money and then leave us alone. I think that's the big difference today.
Yeah. What about you, James?
Yeah, I agree. I think that sort of CSR policy, which is, you know, well intentioned, has evolved into the, you know, people. I think people are employees in companies and boards, and I think there's more investment. There's more, people who give the money, if you like, donate from their paychecks or however the money is generated. They want to have some choice in how it's spent. They're more invested in the whole process these days. It's that next step along the CSR route, if you like, which does mean that the best, from the other side, the best charities, I think, or the best performing charities in this sort of area are those that can tap into and match the ambitions of the company's CSR makeup, whatever that is. So if you can, and Elham and Spencer have both been excellent at this, having worked with them in the past. You know, they are able to sell their value proposition, you know, in strategic terms. They're able to tell the donors, if you like, what the real benefit is for the donors, not just, you know, giving money over and saying it's for a good cause. There's actually some benefit coming back. Like Elham's, you know, mentors, you know, if she engages people from a certain company to be mentors, it's part of their development as well. So that they're getting something out of it on their side as well, and matching that matching those sort of ethics up and that structure up is a real benefit to charities. And like I said, I think that the most successful ones in this realm are the ones that can make that match and can align those sort of those values.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'm a bit like Spencer here, where I come from a very commercial, and Elham too, from a commercial world, where I sort of, as a trustee, I sit there and say, okay, fine, this is a transaction. There's a trade going on here. It doesn't necessarily have to be money. It can be, you know, but both sides have got to get something out of it whenever you're doing something.
Perhaps to James's point, I can help bring some of those benefits to the corporate partners to life by giving you a couple of quick examples. For instance, one of our corporate partners, Kantar, we developed a virtual 3-week internship with them and delivered that in August 2020. The students from Migrant Leaders Development Program that I shortlisted and provided them, I recall one of the students who was studying psychology, really gifted young lady, Sarah, who didn't know what to do with her psychology degree, and she's at Cambridge. And after the internship at Kantar, who do marketing consulting for corporates, she came back to me saying, actually, this is the business I want to use my talents in. So they got a brilliant graduate in our Migrant Leaders mentee. Another example is Israel, who left Nigeria to escape the violence of Boko Haram 10 years ago and is now studying biomedical science at Warwick. His mentor is the global leader of clinical services at Smith & Nephew, and through Migrant Leaders. And again, another great graduate to hopefully work with Smith & Nephew in the future. And there are so many examples of benefits. I remember at the Smith & Nephew, one of their US employees reshared one of our posts and said that this is why I love working for Smith & Nephew, because they support a charity like this. And I realized that the sense of shared purpose that it can create among the corporate employees is so valuable to those corporate sponsors.
And just sort of one very quick question on that is, do you have to train your mentors to be mentors?
We do, because even though they are generally 95% of them come from senior corporate backgrounds, they do start their mentoring experience from different baseline. So we do a lot to train the mentors and the mentees. We have obviously all the policies to be expected, safeguarding, support every day from our operational team should the mentors and mentees need it. We have a mentors guide, mentees guide. We have videos, webinars, workshops to train them and support them, because we want really to get the right outcomes for our mentoring program. And for me personally, the ambition is to have a leading practice mentoring program and corporate partnerships, and at the end of the day, results for the young people who join the program.
Spencer, you talked about you have attended quite a lot of charity events over the years. I don't know how often or whether you come across a lot of people who are in a similar position to you, having set up a charity and everything else. I just wondered whether you think that there is a real shift in people's attitude towards social activism, or whether this is just the natural evolution and the sort of pendulum swinging backwards and forwards.
I think it's a mixture of both, to be honest. I think there's a core group of people in the private sector that would desperately love to do more, but absolutely have no idea how to do more. And when you're time short in that environment, sometimes the quickest way to fulfill that need to do something is to donate. What I'm finding is when I actually engage, or when I identify, when I find these people and I start talking to them, it's almost like you can see the relief. It's like, oh wow, I knew there must be something, I just didn't know what that something was. And to Elham's point, it's one of the easiest routes in for people in the private sector who are time short is to help with mentoring, or is to be given examples to the children of, I do this for a living and so could you. I do actually think there is a more hardcore group that, I don't know, I see it as an ice block that's thawing. I think over the last 30 years, I think there has been, at least from some of the conversations I've been in and some of the people I've met, the level of cynicism is lowering, and I think it doesn't sort of form now in the private sector around, oh, we got 2 days, we have to give 2 days per year, and let's go and paint the playground mentality, which was the 90s and the 2000s. It's more very much now of, yeah, that's great, and we can do that, and I could even do that at the weekend, and we should do that at the weekend because that'd be quite a good team building activity. But it's almost the fishing in the fish analogy again. It's like we can't keep perpetuating the problem by giving the simple solution. Sometimes the solution needs to be more innovative, and I think that's where we're really unlocking and untapping the potential of people who may have not had that much experience or interacting or working in the third sector, but are desperate to do so. And I think it's through events like these, it's through meeting people like Elham, you know what I mean, and listening to people like Catherine and James and yourself, Charles, that I think the more people in the private sector that understand that there's far more to this than just the annual donation or the monthly donation. I often quote what Steve Jobs said, do you know what I mean? It's being the richest man in the cemetery doesn't matter to me, do you know what I mean? It's going to bed at night knowing that we've done something wonderful. That's what matters to me. And I think to your earlier point about, do you think it'll be individuals or do you think it'll be companies? Again, it's inevitably companies are their people. So inevitably there will be individuals at corporates all throughout the UK who have been passionate about this for decades, that will inevitably drive this up the agenda within a company. And equally, I imagine there are management boards of probably FTSE companies that are grappling with the idea of, to Catherine's point, what's the difference between CSR and ESG, and how does all this fit together, and what does it mean for us? And I think some of those soul-searching questions that companies have to go through, it's on one extreme with the social erosion that we are seeing, or we saw pre-COVID in the US, in the UK, in Hong Kong with the riots. There is no point being the last remaining corporate that has the most money in the bank, because, you know what I mean, I think that's where the S in the ESG is really going to start to take shape. And so I think it'll be a mixture of both. Inevitably, you'll have some companies that'll mandate it top down, and they won't fully understand why they're doing it. They're just doing it because it appears to be the right thing to do. Even that, though, is good in my eyes, because at least it's bringing it to the fore, and then it'll give the opportunities to those employees that perhaps are at those companies that are desperate to help the board articulate why this is important. And for me, I think that's where we will really see it's the factors of success that will change. You know, and you're going to see CFOs standing up at the AGMs, and it's not all going to be about cost to income ratios and how much revenue and how much profit. It literally is going to be what's the impact to society you've had in the regions you operate. And if you can't articulate that over a 10, 20, 30-year period, you're probably going to lose your investor base, because the investors themselves are looking for those outcomes through the investments they're making. So I appreciate that was a bit of a long answer, Charles, but there's probably a lot.
No, and I think you've touched on some. I mean, it has amazed me that the whole responsible investment has sort of felt like taken 20 years to really gather any momentum, but actually you've got to start the journey somewhere. Yeah. And it may seem insurmountable and a huge brick wall in front of you, but if you don't start that conversation and start exploring the possibilities, you really don't, you won't make any progress. So I think that's, and actually I think that leads on quite nicely to the next area I'd like to explore is, you know, what you would have done. Would you have done anything differently with the things? What of the, you know, what are the challenges been for you? And I think COVID, obviously, which you've mentioned, it will feature into this of how things have changed as a result of that. Elham, do you want to kick off with that?
I think for me, I would say that I have, throughout this, I've had a problem-solving approach and always to see things from the beneficiary and the young people's perspective and try and respond to their needs and aspirations. But I think what I would have liked, and I will do more of in the future, is to challenge the corporate boards, to try and share some of the thinking that that they ought to really climb that maturity curve in terms of the way they work with society and charities. I see a maturity curve because on the one hand, at the bottom of the maturity curve is responding to what their customers and employees and investors are forcing them to do. On the other hand is what they themselves personally want to do. And then as you move up the maturity curve as a corporate leadership and boardroom, is to think about the long term. Why are we trying to do this? We are trying to develop the next generation of diverse talent. We are trying to develop the economy. We are trying to make our economy in Britain more sustainable and robust. And for that, we need diverse talent. For that, we need social mobility. For that, we need investment in education and health. All of us must remind ourselves of that shared purpose to give back to Britain and to make the British economy and society more robust and harmonious. If we challenge the boardrooms and leaders to always remind themselves that our purpose is actually shared, I think any efforts in corporate social responsibility will be more sustainable.
And what about you, Spencer?
Yeah, definitely. I think if I reflect back on setting up Yellowsands, I think, look, I'm someone who is an eternal optimist. So I struggle to see the negative in anything, and I think that's served me well, to be honest, in setting up Yellowsands. I think I was talking with my wife last night. I mean, when I mentioned on this, I mean, when I first was setting everything up, I must have wrote about 500 letters to as many famous, who I thought were wealthy, Welsh people around the world as possible. I didn't worry that 498 of them didn't respond. I couldn't stop talking about the 2 that did for about 3 months. Do you know what I mean? It was, I think that mentality has served me well. I mean, when we received the first anonymous donation, you know, that it just, I knew we were onto something, and I knew it was what would I do differently? With reflection, I think I would have focused less on applying some of the corporate strategy knowledge that I tried to bring. So I was very methodical. Do you mean I had a first 100-day plan, 6-month plan, you know, in the 12-month plan where I wanted to be in 18 months, 2 years, I mean, out to probably 10 years. So the financial models underpinning that, I think they were a bit unrealistic, and probably not required, to be honest. But equally, arguably, would I have been able to help as many of the children that we've helped in the first 2.5 years had I not done that? So it's hard to know what I would do differently. I think definitely where I'm standing today, it's being super grateful for the team I have around me. We don't employ anybody at Yellowsands, but there's about 20 people that actively support in their way. And I don't mean financial support, I mean time, helping me, helping the trustees. So maybe that would be a lesson that I would, if I was to do this again, is I wouldn't be so single-minded for the first 12 months. I mean, because it really was, I had the idea, I had the solution, and we were going to do this and we were going to change the world. And the we, and that was me. I think going back, I think I would have probably taken 1 or 2 months to try and find trying to identify some of the people that I've, like, even getting to know Elham from this conversation, you know what I mean, meeting the Elhams of the world before I'd actually set up Yellowsands, and realizing that actually there are genuine people in the in the private sector that want to help, and understanding that they just don't know how to help. If I could have tapped into that in the first 3 months to 6 months when I was going through the setup back in 18, that would be a lesson learned for me, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that neatly leads on to founder syndrome. I mean, both of you have founded an organisation. I'm maybe a bit premature to be asking you the question, but have you thought about your exit strategy and how you leave the organisation? Because obviously your imprint, both of you on them, is going to be huge. Spencer, why don't you kick off with the first, and then I'll turn to Elham.
I'm just referring back to my last comment about the 10-year plan. I think my exit was planned for year 6 in the 10-year plan, and probably in quarter 2 of year 6, knowing me in terms of the way I plan everything. But I say that tongue in cheek, a little bit in jest. But I think the point is important. Even though it might seem silly to have a 10-year plan for a charity when you first set up, and support that by financial models, the fact that I was thinking about how do I get myself out of this within the first 10 years, for this to be self-sustaining, it needs to not be all about the founder. And for me, I'm very keen, some of the children that we've supported, we've got a few at the London School of Economics this year. We've got one at Bath University. What I'm hoping is a few of these Welsh students will graduate, they'll go on to jobs, and then I can start bringing them into governance roles with Yellowsands, possibly getting them on the board as trustees. And then over a number of years, one of those could take over from me, because what I feel is the problem that needs to be solved in 2018 maybe a different problem that needs solving in 2028, and I'm accepting enough that by the time I have spent probably 5 to 10 years doing this with Yellowsands, I may not have the best solutions in mind, and I need to be listening and accepting the solutions that will be coming to me from the younger members of Yellowsands that will have gone through our programs and hopefully joined the charity. So for me, the exit strategy is somewhere in the first 10 years, definitely to step away from being the chair of the trustees, and actually I'll probably be involved for the rest of my life in some way, shape or form, but I definitely want to step off being a trustee within the first 10 years, that's for sure.
What about you, Elham? Have you given any thought to it?
I have, and I think there is a thing about founder syndrome. There's no doubt that I feel very emotionally attached to the charity. It's my baby. I envisioned it, developed it, and scaled it up, and I care very much like a Spencer. I care about the outcomes for the young people. I don't plan for an exit. I think I will always be working on the charity, but I recognize that my role has and will continue to evolve. I will always make sure that I put myself doing the activities that best serve the charity and the beneficiaries at any point in time. And I also surround myself by people who are very different to me. So we have an advisory board, a young leaders panel, trustees who are very different to me, other volunteers and team members who bring quite a wide array of experience, so that together we can get the outcomes that we hope for. But I would like to work on the charity for the rest of my life and do everything I can for the charity.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm very conscious of that we're coming up to the dreaded hour. So Catherine and James, have you got any sort of final observations that you'd like to share? Catherine.
Oh, I was holding off for James then and being polite.
Being far too polite.
Far too polite. I think it's more, isn't it, that this self-learning, improvement. I think sometimes, I suppose, the negatives from founder syndrome, when it's at its worst, is that the founder believes they know it all. And it's their way, and their way is right, and everybody else is wrong. And I think, a bit more humility, and us allowing an organisation to evolve, and to admit we don't know everything, and that it can be improved upon, and that can only be a good thing. I think is really refreshing to hear that. I think often when I come across founder syndrome, it's generally a fatal diagnosis for which there is no cure. So I think the fact that Elham and Spencer have both thought about that in advance and have planned for succession in their organisations is really refreshing to hear.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. James?
Yeah, I'd agree entirely. I think the fact that Spencer and Elham are both talking about exit plans, or at least handover plans, and having faith in passing them over to people that they develop themselves and trust is a positive, really. And I know in Elham's case, she's taken a long time and a lot of efforts to develop some of the people that work in her charity now, are conscious that it's going to be a handover process. So it's very much a long-term strategic plan, as much as anything else. I couldn't agree more.
Fantastic, thank you. The hour has just flown. You guys have been truly, truly inspirational, I have to say. These, to me, you remind me of the reasons why I got involved with charities at the thing, and I'm sure Catherine and James will say the same thing. And I just, the work you're doing is absolutely both extraordinary and fantastic and humbling. And I just hope you continue with the passion, as I'm sure you will. I have to say, my takeaways from this, and to paraphrase, is having a clear vision and the ability to clearly articulate that. The sort of keys to your success of what I've sort of picked up. If you want to make a real difference, don't let barriers stand in the way. So, never thinking that that taking anything personally, being driven by personal experience. And I think that is a really key thing, because you then have a great understanding and wanting to use that for a force of change. And then Catherine's comment is people by people, and your passion, both of you, has just come through on this. So I'd like to thank you both Spencer and Elham, and James and Catherine. It has been a fantastic session, and I suspect we might need to come back and revisit it and dig a little deeper in the months to come. But thank you very much.